Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies?
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers, whatever that means. Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Rob-casting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. This is Robservations, episode number 756. Now, I got to tell you, it's Halloween week. You know, it's the witching hour. It doesn't just happen at 12 o'clock every night. It happens once a year, as we all know. The Festival of Samhain. If you have silver shamrock masks, give them to your kids. They'll be killed. Connell Cochran will succeed in destroying all the children. Or maybe Michael Myers will stalk you. Or perhaps maybe you're going to turn into a werewolf if there is a full moon. But here's the thing. I think one of the most oppressed classes of creatures on Earth are the supernatural creatures. The creatures that they have no advocates. There is no creatures' lives matter. There is no one to tell, say, an extraterrestrial who might have lost their way and found their way to Earth, and the only way they can survive is to eat mankind. There is no one to advocate for these people, these great creatures that we've loved. They've endured longer than most human beings have. But I have somebody who is an advocate for these creatures, who speaks for them. An author of a book that has come out, and I think it's one of the maybe the most important tomes that you can buy today. And that is How to Survive a Human Attack. This is a book that was written for these creatures that have been oppressed, destroyed, hunted, imprisoned for millennia or more, depending on, if they're ancient astronauts, aliens could have been here 10,000 years ago. Who knows? But there's an author here, and I thought it was really important. This book's been out for just a few weeks, but this author, this woman, has decided to come on and speak, to be an advocate. Halloween week for the creatures that have no one to speak for them. And the terrifying thing, the scariest thing about this book is how real it actually is, and how really, if you think about it, how needed this book is. And I can't, I don't want to oversell. I don't want to oversell, but I think it's important to know that there is a human being out there that cares, a human being out there that felt it necessary, that she speaks for those who had no one to speak for them. Her name is Kathy Flann, and she has a story to tell, and she has decided to come on this show for Halloween to help those who can't help themselves. So please welcome author Kathy Flann to Robservations. Kathy, my God, or maybe I should say my Satan, depending on which creatures we're talking about. I cannot thank you enough for coming on to Robservations to talk about what I think might be the most fun book I've read in a long time, How to Survive a Human Attack. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. And I guess one thing I would say is I I think I'm human anyway, because there are those like 7 or 8 hours at night when I cannot account for my whereabouts or, whatever. I become unconscious for that period of time. So, who knows what I'm doing, but I assume that I'm human. So,
You know what? All I can say is I read this book, and clearly you have insight that many human beings might not have. And this could explain it. 8 hours a day, you go into another realm, maybe the realm that you belong in.
well, if you go, there's this rectangle, in the bedroom, and you go in there and you become unconscious on it for however many hours. And, many cannot account for that time. And
It
then
is
if
true.
you don't become unconscious during that time, you might be described as monstrous.
Well, you don't look monstrous. I mean, I have to say that you sent me this gorgeous photo of yourself, a great author photo with a house that looks mysterious in the background. I really love this image. I want to thank you for sending it to me. Is this how you want people to remember you, with this image? No, I don't know.
Yes. I mean, that's like, in June, that picture. So
So I have to ask you, one of the things, as a jaded horror and sci-fi fantasy fan, movies, novels, comics, television shows. I mean, Kolchak the Night Stalker just came out on Blu-ray, which is a favorite of mine from when I was a kid. The premise of this book, basically, it's a guidebook. Well, it is called How to Survive a Human Attack. Where did you come up with the idea for this book, other than being an advocate for those creatures who are unable to help themselves? How did you decide to come to write this book? Were you a fan of this genre material growing up?
I 100% was. One of my favorite memories of going to the movies when I was really small, was my mom taking me to see Creature from the Black Lagoon, a special showing of it in 3D with the
Wow.
glass and like everything. And it haunted me like forever, just the monster. It was so sad. Like it was so campy and great, but it was so sad to me. It just broke my heart. This monster just wanted to like be friends with the people on the boat, sort of, and like he was like, I'll just, he doesn't know. There's nobody else like him. There's nobody to teach him anything. And he's like, these beings kind of look like me, and I'll just take one. That seems reasonable to me. So, so that was always on my mind. And I wrote a short story called Black Lagoon when I first started writing fiction. It was one of the first stories I ever published. Not a funny story, but one that was inspired by that film. And then, when later, when this book got started, because my husband, we usually have the same taste in everything. I love your turn, like the imagination connoisseur idea. I mean, we just like devour all of this stuff, and we usually have the same taste. But he was watching The Walking Dead when it first came out, and I wanted to get engaged with it, and I just was really struggling, and I didn't know why, because I felt like it was something I should like, but I kept avoiding it and like going in the other room, and I was supposed to be working on something. I had been commissioned to write an essay. So I was in the other room trying to think of what I was going to write, and then I could hear the screams from the other room of the zombies getting slaughtered. They were just getting slaughtered, and I was like, this is why I don't like this show. It's like these poor zombies, they just, like they're just getting slaughtered all the time, and they're really bad at this. They don't know what they're doing, and there's so many of them. They should be winning, and so then I just found, instead of writing this essay, I was suddenly writing advice for these zombies, like, how to do this better. I was like, you can do better. Like you are outnumbering them by quite a lot. So this should be easier for you, So then I started thinking, because of what I always loved about writing fiction was the idea, or even when I teach, like my favorite thing to talk about is point of view, is, just how little movements in how you look at something changes the story.
Right.
And I was very fascinated to find myself suddenly thinking about it from their point of view. And I was like, well, do they even want to survive? I mean, they seem like really hungry, but like, beyond being hungry, are they like, really, is this their goal? Like, what is their goal? So I just, that's kind of how it got started. And then that piece just kind of flew out. I was just like, I composed it as like frequently asked questions. That was the structure. With like FAQs, I was like, oh yeah, like you go and you like troubleshooting something. And so I just like broke it down, and I thought, nobody's going to publish this. This is really weird. And I didn't really even know what it was. It's not really fiction. It's not nonfiction. So it was like, okay, well, I just sent it into a magazine, had a section called experimental. So I was like, I'll put it in there and submit it and see what they think. And they took it like 5 minutes later. It was like, what? Never happened. So, and it was like, there's, then I was slowly starting to think about other monsters after that. And I was like, well, they're all dying at the end of these movies. They're terrible at this. So, so the swamp monster was the next one, because like I said, I was so, taken with the swamp monster my whole life. So I was immediately like, I got to write one for the swamp monster. So then you start thinking, well, what's his problem? Unlike the zombie, he is alone. The zombies have each other, but the swamp monster has no one. He's all by himself, and there's nobody like him. So what do you do? So it's like kind of reverse engineering. I was like, well, if he wants to survive, he's going to have to blend in. Like, that's going to be important. So we did. So I decided to do makeovers for him, so he could, blend in with humans and just give him tips. You're kind of shaped like a human, so if you could just wear some cute outfits, like maybe that you could have what you want, which is some friends, and not be dead. Because I do feel like he doesn't want to be dead.
No.
Like, zombies, I wasn't sure. So.
Well, it's I gotta in the book, in the table of contents here, I love this. The part 1 is understanding humans. Which I just love that it's like a guidebook, like when you're a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout or something. Here's the Boy Scout guide to camping. And I just love that, understanding humans, introductions. This is not your grandfather's Homo sapiens, and then the basics. And then part 2 is, of course, the species-specific survival guides. And I love how you, like you said, the swamp monster makeovers, the first-time haunter's guide for ghosts, spirits, poltergeist, specters, and wraiths, how to evict squatters. I mean, it's really clever. And, the other thing is, as you go on, self-training 101 for werewolves, sit, don't speak, stay alive. And I there's something really charming about, especially in this day and age, where, we've had, self-help books since the 70s or whatever, but probably even before that. But I just love the idea, because, it was, to me, it was a really fresh take on all of this. But it shows such a love of monster movies and monster films and everything. And I'm curious, when you were writing the book, did you suddenly binge watch a bunch of movies or TV shows to sort of get in that mindset and figure out, oh, well, these are the different conflicts and things these poor creatures have to deal with?
Oh, 100%. I was rewatching things. I was reading a lot about every genre. Like I would think every single section, I would think about what's the canon? Like what are the musts in this section? And I would try to at least a little bit allude to each film, even if it's very askance, and think about what are the kind of overarching tropes in this genre of werewolf or cyborg or whatever it is. And just think about well, is there a pattern of how they die in these, because they always do, so it's except for swarms, because swarms generally do okay. I find there are some that don't make it, but they do have some success. And I had initially thought that I would have a whole section of successes, there would be testimonials, this is how you do it. These are the ones that make it, But I mean, there were just too much. There was so much material, and there was only so much that could fit in the book. So they just ended up being another chapter instead of a whole section with monsters that survive. But mostly they don't. And so it was just a case of thinking about, what's going on in this particular type of monster movie and how do they generally die, and then thinking backwards from that, like, what do you do about that? So like the Mummy was like, well, the Mummy's basic problem is home security. Like he's getting broken into all the time. Like he's hanging out sleeping. Like he's not doing anything to anyone. He is sleeping. And like people are coming in and breaking in and trying to take his stuff. They want his goods, his jewels, his gold, whatever, or his magic or whatever it may be. And they're breaking in all the time. So, I was just thinking about it that way. Like, oh, well, what does he need in order for this not to happen? And then if they do break in, what should he do? It's that kind of stuff. So.
I mean, it's funny because that kind of, it doesn't necessarily write itself. You had to write it. But going down that rabbit hole, you can come up with any myriad of things, any problems. Like you said, it's home security is that's just a very funny idea, but it's also very true. I mean, tombs have been getting plundered for hundreds of years, and the problem is us. Like you said, the Mummy she just wants to sleep. Like, why are you in here? I was put here for a reason. I'm enjoying my slumber. I've been here for 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years, 3,000 years, and you have to come in and wreck shop on me. That's not cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, I might strangle someone too. It's like I was just millennia, like having a really good sleep, and I'm like, okay, look, somebody just came in here like 300 years ago and did the same thing, and I strangled that person. So what do you think's gonna happen?
Our one of our longtime viewers, a great man, Tom Jr. Jackson, says, I literally just placed an order for this book. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's what we're here. We're here to sell books. Buy this book. It is by the way, the book is available on Amazon. So you can go and get it now, and it's really delightful. Now, I would ask you, horror has always been a genre that has, it's always been with us, especially whether Mary Shelley was, writing about the postmodern Prometheus, writing Frankenstein, and, going back into human history. There's always been the supernatural. There's always been monsters. But what's really been interesting is over the last 20 years, the female audience has grown. I mean, a lot of women now they're the first line of defense when a horror movie comes out. It's women that are going to see horror films now, and there's a lot of female-oriented horror when there didn't used to be, and which I think is great, and it makes Comic-Con more interesting. Now instead of like old men like myself rifling through comic book long boxes, you have multi-generations of whole families going to Comic-Con and delving into the cinefantastique or the comic books or just the fantastic of literature. What do you attribute that to? And as a female author who's delved into this world, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk now about gender in terms of, but there's always been female writers in horror, beginning with Mary Shelley. And also, I mean, I read Anne Rice, Interview with a Vampire, she wrote that book, I think it came out in 1976, and Chelsea Quinn Yarborough and all that. So do you feel that horror as a genre is gender specific, or is it for everybody?
I mean, I think it is for everybody. I think in the past, there's probably been, more of a male perspective. The monsters, I started to notice that I look at this book is obviously based on the older monster movies.
Classics.
Yeah, the classics. And I think that, when I started writing it, I always knew there would be a witch in there because that's a classic movie monster. You cannot not have a witch in there. But as I was working on the whole book, I started to understand that, most of the monsters were implied male, if not outright male. And that was interesting to me. I didn't really think about it until I started working on it and got pretty far into it. So when I worked on the witch chapter, it became especially important to me to think about how I wanted to portray her story and give her advice. And it changed a lot because of that awareness of that feeling of responsibility toward her. Because because I suddenly understood how male the book was in a way. So it was really interesting. But I was also thinking, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent here. I can come back to the witch thing, but like I was also just reflecting on this yesterday about how, because my husband and I were having a conversation about the Halloween movies. And I was thinking how, like, you know, when I was younger and those were first coming out, I really never was very drawn to them. I thought they were good and I watched them, but it wasn't like something I was really excited about watching in like some other movies. And I think I was thinking about it from a gendered perspective. Like, you know, I feel like as a woman, all you have to do to have that kind of terror is like go someplace at night by yourself and not get a parking space close to, you know, where you're going. Like I feel like as a woman, you always have more of like, that's real. Like, you know,
Right.
that idea of being pursued isn't a fantasy. Like there's a reality to that for you that makes the fear that comes from a movie about a pursuit of a woman feel less interesting to me, I guess, because it's, well, I already know what that's like. You know, I'm not learning anything new from that kind of fear per se. Whereas like when I watched Poltergeist, it was like, oh, like the television is dangerous in this. You know what I mean? Like it's so interesting. I'd never thought about that before when I was, you know, 13 or whatever and watching that movie for the first time. It was like, wow. Or like Cujo when the dog is the danger. And I'm like, I have a dog and he's kind of a jerk, you know, like I love my dog, but he is kind of a jerk. Like, you know, so it's interesting. I was always breaking up dog fights and stuff when I was a kid. So when I read Cujo, I was like, oh, like that really blew my mind and really terrified me because it was sort of taking the familiar and defamiliarizing it in a way that I hadn't thought about before. And so I feel like, I don't know if like that's really kind of a roundabout way to answer your question about gender, but
No, I think, you know, I think the proliferation of serial killer stories, for instance. I mean, I remember we had, of course, Psycho, and you had like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the one thing about slashers is they're humanoid, or like Michael Myers may or may not be supernatural, but there's something unique about slashers. But really, if you run fast enough, you can get away and don't do anything stupid. But serial killers are frightening because they're just us, and they're usually men, and they're usually going after women, and that's a very real world fear. And I feel that really brought back something, whether you're watching Silence of the Lambs or Seven or any number of things, the serial killer genre. But the problem that I have with that always is it's so down to earth. You know, I was a kid who grew up with, you know, you love monsters, you love the supernatural, the fact that Dr. Frankenstein knitted together parts from many different bodies and basically flew a kite into a storm to get the electrical power to reanimate this creature. And then in the original Frankenstein and also in Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein is the Frankenstein's monster is you feel sorry for him. You know, and he's just so he might throw a little girl into the pond, but he's just trying to understand who she is. You know, and I feel like that one of the great things when you're a kid watching, especially the classic Universal monsters, is you identify with these monsters because as a kid, you understand their plight. Like they're just looking for a place to belong. You know, and that's what I loved about, you know, your book is it sort of tapped into that primal, you know, it tickled that area of me that has loved monsters since I was a little kid. And it's like, you want to help them. You know, it's like, don't we want to help them?
No, it's like he's a little clumsy. Like he's not navigating this perfectly, but who is, you know? Like none of us are perfect and we're doing our best and all of it feels, you know, like bewildering to us. So like I feel like that all the time, you know? So it's like, you know, people confuse me constantly. So I feel like, well, what if, you know, you were even one more step removed and you came into this, you know, knowing nothing. Well, you know, the little girl, you know.
It was her time. Now, I'm curious, when you started to do this, did you like make a list like, okay, here are the monsters I need to go look at? You know, like you said, a witch or Frankenstein, the wolf. You've obviously got vampires in terms of the reanimated undead, a vampire, a werewolf, but were there ever like subgenres of creatures that you were looking at and then you thought, nah, that couldn't be as funny, or I can't find a case. Like, how do you write a book about, well, you did write about xenomorphs, but like the alien from Alien. You know, you look at that alien, there's not a whole lot of, like, I guess he was awakened from his slumber. Like, he was just an egg. So when you start getting into like extraterrestrials, did you ever, when you were writing the book, say, well, if their methodology was just too much, that I don't need to be an advocate for them? Like, where do you draw the line at, say, extraterrestrials? What if they came here purposefully to eat human beings? Would you be an advocate for them or not?
Well, I mean, it's like you would. I had a whole section that initially that was going to be for aliens, but the book, because we had illustrations, it got so long that there was a lot of things that we didn't get to finish or put in. You know, like there just wasn't space for everything. So one of the things that ended up not being in the final version of the book, although we had, you know, initially thought it would be, was aliens. There are no aliens in this book. So it was like the way I was going to go about dealing with aliens, you know, was capitalism. Because I was like, they just, you know, they're, you know, ambitious, and they're looking for new territory, and, you know, they're hustlers. So they're going to come and, you know, try and tap into some new resource and revenue streams.
Oh my God. Well, this has got to be the sequel.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but I mean, that's now, because now that I'm thinking about the way you're putting it this way, like, you know, the Predator, they're just workaday dudes. They're coming down for their Sunday afternoon. They're hunting on the weekends. They come to Earth.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the greatest things in any movie ever is the beginning of Aliens versus Predator 2 Requiem, which is not a great movie, but you see a predator in the Predator homeworld. You know, and it's like this sprawling metropolis, and it gets like a ding, ding, ding. There's a problem on Earth, and the Predator's like, all right, you know, I gotta go find out what the problem is. You know, and it kind of had that thing in it, and that's what your book reminded me of, is if these characters were. It's like, I love the fact that you the creature from the Black Lagoon was your touchstone, because you're right. I mean, that he's just living in the jungle. It's like, he's not like he's swam up the L.A. River and is starting to kill people in the L.A. basin. You know, I mean, he's in his home environment. He doesn't know how he got there. You know.
Well, exactly. Like, and I feel like he's just hanging out, and they came to him. You know. And, you know, suddenly he, you know, they were going to capture him and take him back as like a specimen, I think. And you know, what did he do to deserve that? He was just, you know, living his little swampy, lonely life, you know. And the same thing kind of goes for, you know, like Alien, actually, because I had that urge still, even though the book is finished, I actually just wrote a new piece that was put in a magazine. Because I'm still bothered by these aliens, because I just finished one about alien parasites because we watched *Malignant*, and I was like, you know, the twin is portrayed, the parasitic twin is kind of portrayed as the monster, but really the big twin enveloped that little twin, you know. So they were just trying to be an embryo, and they got enveloped, and that other big twin took everything. Probably all their parents' attention, all the resources, you know. So they're mad. They're a little mad. It's like a family tiff, you know. So then I was thinking about all the other parasites, like in Alien. It's like, you know, you always have that scene where somebody's like, don't touch that. Hey, maybe we don't need a specimen. Hey, are you taking your helmet off? Like, what do you know? It's like, you know, then it goes on their face, and then they're like, oh, you know, like, that's the parasite's fault because it's a monster. But it's, you put your face there. So I just had one come out called "How to Be an Agreeable Long-Term Guest: A Primer for Alien Parasites."
Wait, is that published anywhere?
Yes, it's in a magazine called Points and Case, which is associated with Second City. It just came out last week because I was just like, it's Halloween. I'm not done yet.
Right. Well, I mean, that you could expand that into a whole. It's interesting because if you think about you like the invasion of the body snatchers, aliens. I mean, one of the things that I've been fascinated by because I recently saw Eternals. I've been thinking a lot about cosmology. You know, the origins of the universe and like the origins of life. And one of the things that you don't ever really think about when you're watching these movies is like I love Philip Kaufman's the second iteration of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the movie made in 1978. And in that movie, you know, human beings are being replaced by these pod recreations. So the human beings look exactly the same, but they're really these pod people, and then they're now inhabited by I mean, you really don't know. Like, are they being inhabited by aliens themselves, or is it human beings that have been reborn but without emotion? And I often wonder, well, who's pulling the strings? Like, who are making the political decisions? As humanity is being replaced, like, are they gonna fix the roads? And is there going to be public education? Like, are they going to send pod kids to school to learn pod things? Are they going to grow up? And I always wondered, and I've always wondered also about like let's say Satan succeeds. The son of Satan is born and he achieves, like in the Omen, you know, in Omen 3, Damien Thorne, the son of Satan, is now grown up. And what is Satan going to do? Like, are you going to deal with public education or taxes? Or if you become president of the United States, like, what is your economic policy going to be? Or are you just going to damn all the souls to hell? And I've often wondered, like, whenever I read a lot of dark fantasy and horror novels, and there's some of them, there's like Cthulhu-like beings that are going to take over the world. And I've always wondered, like, okay, well, what happens when you win? Like, the stories are all about the struggle. But what if you succeed? Yeah. Like, then what? Do we go on, like, our merry way? And how does that work? Like, if Satan takes over the world, well, then what? Are you going to make everyone sign their souls away so everyone gets a contract when they pay their taxes every year? You must sign this contract giving us your immortal soul. You know, and it's funny because we laugh, but I do think that these are things that I consider. Like, when I read sci-fi and horror and we do have like an invasion of the Earth, why is it that all invading aliens now, whether it's the Quiet Place aliens or we haven't seen them, but the Apple Plus series Invasion, we're always seeing, like, what I love about the Predators is they show up with technology. You know, they come in ships and they've got armor and they've got weapons and they've got things that they've made. So, you know, they have a culture. But when you see the Quiet Place aliens, they're just aliens that hunt. So they're scary, but there's no philosophy behind them. Or is there? Like, we don't know, because you never see that. And then to demystify, like, I always thought if you demystify, like, I've always wanted to see, we've had shows like The Quiet Place, or not The Quiet Place, I mean, the what is it, the Good Place. You know, and you find out The Good Place, the sitcom is there in the other place. And I've often wondered about that, like the bureaucracy of hell. There's got to be somebody's got to decide what to do. The whole idea of, like, well, we're going to tempt you. You know, we're going to show up and we'll grant you 3 wishes if you sign away your eternal soul. Well, who ends up writing those documents? Like, does hell have a law firm? Like we saw it in Keanu Reeves, the Devil's Advocate. But I do ask myself these questions. Like, if hell is a place, if it exists, and people are drawing their plans against us, I mean, can you imagine in War of the Worlds when the aliens decide to invade Earth? Like, did they have how many meetings did they have to have before they decided on an invasion strategy? Because they can't just do it. Like, they have a strategy. Yeah. Like, so that's what I liked about, you know, I thought,
I mean, there'd be paperwork involved. It's just...
I mean, because we can't even get our own political parties to do something in this country. But apparently, alien invaders or, you know, Dracula always figures out a way to get his coffin and the hallowed earth that he must sleep in or whatever, that he always figures out somebody to do that for him. You know, he's always got a familiar, like a Renfield, and there's always somebody that's willing to be like, I'll come work for you. You know, and that's one of the things I really liked in your book is when you flip the switch or you flip the script, and look at it from their perspective, it made me think back to that, like, yeah, man. I mean, all we see is the horror parts, the parts where these poor creatures, their environments have been encroached upon, and they're just trying to survive, and we have to mess up their shit. I mean,
yeah, I mean, usually, if you really think, most of the time, the human is the aggressor in the story. Like, they have, been the one to approach the monster in some way. They've been the one to go into their home in some way, shape, or form, whatever that is. And then with the witch, they often go into she's kind of like a business person, and they go into a contract with her, and then they violate it most of the time. It's like they want all the stuff, but then they don't want to pay whatever they agreed they were going to pay. And then she's the bad guy, So it's really interesting to me once you start thinking about it that way, how the people are the problem in the story, that they've brought it on themselves, but then they're mad about it, So, I like what you're saying, because it's like, if you really thought about it, about these big projects that are going on for, world domination or whatever from the aliens. I mean, the aliens are a whole other thing, but like that, if you really knew what their project was, if it was fleshed out in the story, you might be like, that's actually kind of compelling,
Yeah, like if Satan ran
really
the...
upset you. I bet you.
Yeah, I mean, if Satan was president of the United States, I'm sure Congress would be much more effectual in being able to carry out policy. And I think in the long run, that might be better off for all of us. So if Satan, if like a Damien Thorne character was in fact in the White House, perhaps we'd sort out problems. Maybe we would, because it would be in Satan's best interest to make sure we had a well-funded space program, so he could export his power out into the universe. And so it might not be such a bad thing.
Yard signs pretty soon, I mean, it doesn't seem that outlandish to me right now.
No. Well, I'm curious, as far as you're writing the book, the actual process of writing, from the time you got the idea to the time you had a finished manuscript, how long did that take?
It was a really long process, not because of the actual writing, which was really fun, and so I was excited every moment that I was working on it. Honestly, it was more finding an audience for it. I had a few pieces published early, and then I thought, well, maybe this could be a book. And so I had to teach myself how to write a proposal, because when you write fiction, which is what I had written before, you don't sell it on a proposal. You have to write the whole book, and then hopefully someone will like it. But with something which is hilarious, this book is considered nonfiction, which is one of the things I absolutely love about it.
Come on.
I'm not kidding. In terms of like how it is categorized, it is nonfiction. It shows up in the nonfiction sections. All its tags are nonfiction.
Oh, that is amazing. That's even better.
Yes. So a lot of times with nonfiction, you have to write a proposal, which I didn't know how to do. So there was a process of learning how to do that. And then,
sure.
The agent that I had at the time was not very excited about it. I went around and found another agent that, I connected with on this particular project, which was important to me because I wanted to do this, and I wanted to make sure I was with someone who wanted to do this and not just, the other kinds of stuff I had been writing, because I just felt really passionate about it. And I felt like we would click if they got this, because it was really weird. And so a lot of people were kind of like, okay, like, I don't know what you're doing, because it doesn't kind of neatly fit into anything. So also, I think, when I started it around, I don't know, when 2013, 14, or whenever Walking Dead first came out, I think the world was a different place, and people weren't prepared at that point to think about humans as monsters. So I feel like the world kind of connected with the project more as time went by, and there was more of a sense of like this being a plausible idea that could connect with people as time went by, timing was really important, and I don't think the timing was right early. But also, I think like I got better at doing them as time went by. So in some ways it worked out, even though I was disappointed to have to, like go through this long process with it. I look back and think it was for the best, because I feel like I was able to hone it and work on it longer and kind of know more what I was trying to do. I converted it to a graphic novel proposal at one point.
Wow.
So I had to learn how to write the visuals for it. When you write a graphic novel script, it's like you write like sort of like a screenplay.
Yes.
And you can describe the visuals much like you would in a screenplay as well. You sort of describe the visuals. And I'm not an artist, but so I could picture in my head what it was going to look like, though. So I was able to write that down. And what was really cool was that when we did, my agent's name is Courtney. When Courtney and I connected with an editor on it, the editor, Jess, said, well, I really like this idea, but could it not be a graphic novel? And we were like, well, as it happens, I actually can make it not a graphic novel, because that's what it was to start with. But I think having converted it to visuals and then back again made it possible for the visuals to be stronger than they would have been had that not happened as part of the process.
Right.
So, and I think because the visuals were already described, there was sort of a roadmap for the illustrator and for the editorial team and so on. And they took it and ran with it, so it was a very collaborative effort.
Yeah, which is great. So we have a viewer from Norway, Terje, a longtime member of this community who I've known for years. Terje has a good question. I love the concept. I have it on order. What are your thoughts on European lore? Trolls, fairies, and swamp women who lure men into death.
Yeah, I always loved reading like old fairy tales, and how the witch, for example, would have origins in Europe, and I read a lot about where that idea of the witch came from. And when I was in college, I actually took a course on children's literature, and it went into fairy tales from the European fairy tales, and boy, those are so dark. The witch, I remember in one of them, it's like the witch dances herself to death in hot shoes at the end. There's like lots of times where she gets boiled in a cauldron of oil. These deaths are no joke. And this was like for the kids, like, okay, good night, honey. Sweet dreams. This is what the story you would tell. I guess it was supposed to make them feel like the witch wasn't going to get them when they went to sleep. I don't know, but I feel like there's a whole canon there of creatures that you could do more with. And in fact, our son lost a tooth, and this is going a whole different direction, but our son lost a tooth, and I started thinking about the tooth fairy today. And I was like, boy, she's weird,
Oh, well, if I might suggest a book, it's hard to find, but if you want to read one hell of a great horror novel that I think is right up your alley, it's by a guy named Robert Devereaux, and it's called Santa Steps Out. And it's about Santa Claus having an affair with the Tooth Fairy and the horrible ramifications of what ensues. And it's not a book for kids, but if I could ever do an R-rated animated special, I would want to make Santa Steps Out. But it's something you should check it out. It's right up your alley. You would.
Oh yeah, I will definitely. Thank
you. You would love it. But so the process, took years for you to write this book. Now, you talked about what was it like? Obviously you've sold things to like McSweeney's, and I'm a huge fan of McSweeney's. My God, if you don't follow McSweeney's on Twitter, people, what's life all about? You're missing out. But so what was the process? Could you offer some advice to burgeoning writers who are looking for representation? How does that process work now? I know publishing has become so different, like everything else. Whether you're trying to get a movie made or it's all like known IPs or known authors, how does somebody break in and get representation? I know there's no right answer, but what's some advice you might offer?
Well, as part of my life, I work mentoring people, who are writers, and I teach writing classes, and I edit and stuff. So I help writers a lot and work with them a lot. And it's one of my passions, actually. I love to do it. I just feel like everyone has a story to tell, and no one tells their story exactly the same way. And it's just...
Oh, we know that here on this channel.
Yeah, it's just fun. I mean, I know you had a short story contest. I was looking at that, and
well, we haven't yet. It has. We're going to. Maybe you should contribute. You can be one of our star writers who gets to have a story that anchors the book. But yes, we're going to do that.
It was a really cool contest. I was like reading about it, and I saw the episode where you announced it and stuff. So
yeah.
That's pretty so I'm really, I mean, I think that's really cool that you're offering that as part of the community. And but anyway, getting to your point, like about representation, like it's not easy, but I always think the most important thing is to focus on the work itself first. That you have to, make sure that you've revised whatever you're working on to its absolute best form as you can. And I think a community is a really big part of that. I mean, we think of writing as a solitary pursuit, but I'm here to tell you this. My own experience, as well as everyone I know, it is not solitary. Like you have to get feedback. You have to have a community that tells you where you are with your project, because you cannot see your project for yourself. So you need that community. And if you don't have one, it's important to find one. So that's like number one, is like make sure you have a community that's offering you, really good feedback and helping you accelerate your process and cheer you on. And then once you've got the piece as strong as you can make it, then you can go out and search for representation, and you have something to show them that you might pique their interest. But writing a query letter that's going to say to somebody who's getting a bajillion query letters a day, it's like, again, you have to think like the other person instead of thinking like yourself. It's like you have to think, well, if I were getting 8,000 million query letters a day, what would make this one stand out? Why would I stop and take notice of this? I think the thing I always tell my students, which seems to them shocking, is that, you may only have a sentence or two to catch someone's notice.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true.
Hard. It's a hard fact, but it's true. And I remember one time I had invited some editors to my class to talk about, the being on the other side of the desk and what that's like. And I had been an editor. I used to edit a journal called the Greensboro Review years ago. And I remember I said to the class, I will read, when I was editor, a fiction editor, I would read, maybe a page. And then if it wasn't working, I will move on to the next manuscript. And the students were like, oh, what? They don't read the second page? And then the editors were also gasping. They were like, what? They were like, you read a whole page? And the students were like, ooh, and the editors were like, ooh, and it was, and everyone was shocked for different reasons. And the one editor said, I only read a paragraph. And the other one said, I read a sentence. And then I move on. So it was like, wow,
The same was true. Like I was a reader. I read screenplays professionally for a number of years. And unfortunately, you can tell. I mean, in terms of writing, you can see, does somebody know the screenplay form? Do they understand right away how to write a script? And I mean, when I was being paid to do it, I had to read the whole screenplay. But so many screenplays I would have quit after just a couple of pages. And a lot of the time I would hope it would be good, but you can just tell if you're in the thrall of someone who knows how to write. And if they don't know how to write, I mean, maybe they have a good story there, but usually it's not. But it's amazing to me. It's like pick up your favorite book. Your favorite book grabs you from the first couple of pages, the first page. There's a book, one of my favorite horror novels. It was written in 1981 by Robert McCammon. It's a vampire novel called They Thirst, and the first line of the book is tonight there were demons in the hearth. And I'm like, because there's a kid looking at the flames burning in the fireplace, and I'm like, oh, I'm in. That's just one sentence, and I'm like, I will read that book. And then it just went on to extrapolate upon that idea. What does that mean? There's demons in the hearth, and and the way he described this kid was seeing faces in the flames and spitting spitting tongues and all that. It was just so evocative. And that was the first paragraph of the book and the prologue, and I'm like, oh, I'm in. You know, and
the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I mean, it's kind of the same idea, right? Like that you have, Gregor Samsa woke from uneasy dreams to find himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic vermin. And it's like, really? And then the second sentence, it's like, yes. And then it describes it, right? It's like, yes, he did. He really did. And this is what it looked like. And he's like on his back and his little legs are wiggling and you're like, yes, he is an insect. And what's he going to do? And so it's like that one sentence, you have to do it that way. It's like you have to pull people in, and the job of the sentence is to make you read the next sentence, and the job of that sentence is to make you read the next sentence. So it's like, as a writer, I think there's that combination you have to have of like hubris, like where you think you have something to say, which is ridiculous, and then you have to have like this humility to understand that what you're doing is not going to be good the first time, the second time, the third time, and that nobody cares about you. They just want to read a good story, and you have to, if you don't give it to them, they're going to move on, and I think that's really hard for people.
No, I mean, what I also really liked about your book is the way there's layer upon layer of you've removed yourself from the actual horror story and considered like these creatures are all real. They all exist. So and in doing so, you have then brought your own element of imagination to something. So it's like twice removed, but then we're getting something original. Like, okay, well, if these creatures existed, and normally when you watch Walking Dead, or even if you're watching a Shaun of the Dead or Return of the Living Dead, and it's a humorous story, they still exist. These creatures, whether they're in a serious story or in a like Walking Dead or a Romero zombie movie, you're still dealing with the fact that these zombies are real. And yet, in your writing, you assume that, but then you also assume an extra level of fantasy behind it, that these characters, the monsters also are like, well, I don't mean to be this way, which is I love that. I love it, sort of that something on top of something else, and that in itself is creative, and it becomes interesting. And you also then you make, like, if you go back and you read, like you said, Creature from the Black Lagoon, you can't go watch that movie again and not think about what you've said here today, or not thought about, which I love, because then it, like you said, and I say it on my show every single day, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. Well, so does every monster. Every monster has its own tale, and we're only used to getting like the tail end of that tale. Like the Creature from the Black Lagoon, what did it do for its adolescence? Like we've met the full-grown creature, but what did it do when it was a kid? Where are its parents? Did it go to school?
It's like does it have alligators, or
like
who's it out with?
Absolutely.
Snakes? I don't know.
But these are, we laugh at them, but if you're writing, like if you're doing world building, we have Dune just came out in theaters. Well, you could write a whole, and we find out later in the further books what sandworms really are and what they can actually be, and the fact that no, they're intellectual beings. With the secrets of the universe, and yet we just don't see them that way because we don't perceive them. Like I've always wondered, my girlfriend Elizabeth she always asks me why I take such delight in any kind of communication that we get from our dogs, because one of our dogs is particularly smart. And I'm like, because it's the closest I'm ever going to get to trying to converse with an alien. Like, even though, he lives in our house and everything, a dog's perception of the universe is very different from ours. And yet there are moments when we can actually, there is real communication. There's cognitive reasoning that I'm watching my dog exhibit. He knows that I understand what he said to me or what he's trying to say without in his way, with whether it's sign language or his behavior. And the fact that we have a little bit of a language that we speak together, and that there is real meaningful communication. which I take delight in. And the same is true of our cat. Like, our cat will come up and literally communicate. And so if that's the case, I mean, you'd assume the creature from the Black Lagoon has far more cognitive reasoning skills than just a dog, you know, because it's an amphibian. You know, it can be outside the water and inside the water. So it must know things about what does it mean to live underwater. How do you perceive time underwater? Different than you do, like, I don't know. And I think that's one of the things I loved about your book, is that it makes you think about these creatures in a different way. Like, oh, yeah, okay.
I'm wondering now that you're saying that, like, how much of, you know, like, about a pet ownership is feeding into this, because I'm the same way about my pets. So,
yeah, I mean, it always delights me to communicate with an animal in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, you watch like that YouTube channel, The Dodo or whatever, you know, every cute animal videos, and you watch people interact with animals. And I think on one hand, you know, we love our dogs and our cats. But on the other hand, what fascinates me is like the cognitive skills that anybody who's an animal owner, whatever animal you have, we do communicate with them. And I'm like, well, what if we met an extraterrestrial? Like, where would you begin? That's why I love Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, because, you know, Amy Adams has to figure out, how do you communicate with creatures that are beyond our understanding? But there's got to be some way that we can begin. I mean, that movie is literally about starting a dialogue with alien beings. That's what the entire movie's about, and figuring out their language. And I'm like, and it's a great movie. And I
loved it. I love that movie.
Yeah,
just
and
those parts. I mean, I don't want to get off track, but like, just those parts where you're waiting to see them. Those, like, how that there's the rhythm to when you can see them, and that the suspense of that, the way they developed that, was amazing, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a way, our love of fantasy and science fiction and that we have as a race, if we ever do meet extraterrestrials, and I assume that they're not just going to come and strip all of our resources and get rid of us in seconds, but if there is an opportunity to communicate with a truly alien species, like in Arrival, that we would be able to start a dialogue, you know. And that's one of the things I loved about your book, is that, like, you basically come from a position of empathy. Like, these crazy humans, they're always trying to get rid of us. But here, that's why I say you're an advocate for these creatures. You want to help them through the inside of your book. And
well, also, like, the idea that humans have of supremacy is so interesting in itself to me. That, you know, that seems to be like a foregone conclusion. But, like, how much do we really know about things that even on our own planet that are not human? Like, how much do we really understand about that? And that's why at the end there's like this table about hyperbole, because I feel like that is like our basic human trait, is to be, you know, hyperbolic about so many different things. And one of them is about, you know, language skills, for example, which we judge other creatures based on whether they can achieve our language skills. And we don't judge ourselves based on whether we can achieve theirs.
Right.
So I find that really interesting. Like, that doesn't make sense, but that's the way that's the measure we use.
Hell, we all think we can speak for God.
Yeah.
Sure we can. Sure, absolutely. I mean, we're the height of hubris. I mean, human beings think they're at the top of the food chain. And I think that's what's funny, is I think a lot of monster stories, whether they're extraterrestrial monster stories or vampires, werewolves, we know that we've encountered something that's above us on the food chain. If extraterrestrials have the technology to come to Earth, they're inherently more advanced than we are. You know, or if you're immortal, if you're a vampire that can live forever, you're way more advanced than human beings are on a certain level. And I think that's part of the fear. It's not just the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of finding beings that we are inferior to, because we can't. I mean, there's human beings and there's God. There's the creator of all things, and then there's us. There's nothing in between, you know. And the idea, well, wouldn't there be a whole spectrum of creatures in between us? But not according to where humanity is right now. There's our creator, and then there's us. And then when we meet supernatural entity. They're somewhere between the two. And I think that's also part of our problem with, or that's one of the things that all of these stories of the supernatural and are about. They're about having to come to grips with the fact that we are lesser than in some way. And so we tend to view them as evil, and we impose that on them. Like, and rather than, werewolf didn't mean to get bitten by another werewolf. Some dude or some woman that's going to transform didn't mean for that to happen. And yet they're immediately somehow the villain of the story.
Yeah, I mean, you could see them as like a pretty sad, I guess they often are kind of a sad figure. But we're not encouraged to think that too much in the story. Like, a little bit, but usually when they're like wake up naked in their human form in a field, then we're encouraged to feel a little bit sorry, but they're dead by then. So
yeah, or something like that. Yes. By the way, Anonymous sent in a tip. Thank you, Anonymous. And our friend who is on this channel a lot, she sends in a tip as well. Wow. So thank you for that. It's interesting. Tom Jr. Jackson says that Ray Garton is in the chat. Ray Garton is a horror novelist I've been reading for decades. As a matter of fact, I have I can't reach it, but I have a paperback for. Oh no, I do. Look, I have this. Here's a book he wrote, Crucifax Autumn, that has one of the. This book was actually edited. They had to cut a scene out of it. It was so disturbing. But it's cool that other authors are in this chat to support you. So that's pretty neat.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Now, I guess now that it's the Halloween season, I should ask you some generic question. Like, in this day and age, do you think that monsters, that the werewolf, that Frankenstein, that our classic monsters, do they still have a place in our pop culture subconscious? Do they still matter? Can you still write, like, recently a movie like The Witch or the Pierce Brothers' The Wretched depict witches? And I thought they did it in a great way. Do you think that our classical monsters still have a place in our collective imagination, or are they being phased out in favor of new, sexier iterations of things?
I won't claim to be the authority, but I would say that, I work with a lot of younger people, with teaching, and people never stop knowing who these creatures are. Like, it seems like, it's kind of like when I would use Star Wars a lot for talking about plot structure, and really, for the most part, you can still count on people to know what the plot of that is, which always surprises me. And that I feel like the same is true of monsters, like werewolves and witches. And like, witch is within the top 5 Halloween costumes always.
Right.
And I just researched that because I actually wrote yet another piece. I'm still doing this. I can't stop. About for Halloween, to help monsters cope with identity theft for the holiday.
Now, wait a minute. You got to break this down. How do monsters have identity theft?
Well, because there's imposters. There are all these imposters that are going to be out on Sunday dressed as witches. But how are you going to know who's really a witch? Or, you might approach someone and think they're your friend.
The cultural appropriation of monsters.
Might be like, hey, look, there's a coven, and I'm going to go over there and like hang out and network. But that's not really a coven. Those are fourth graders over there. And you're going to end up at a some PTA's backyard rosé event, or you're going to end up at a trunk or treat or something at a Lutheran church. That's not what you had in mind. So.
Oh man, that's hysterical. Well, let me ask you this: has anyone come to you and looked? I would think that this is at least worthy of a 10-episode Netflix series. Has anybody approached you about turning this into a series?
I think there were a few queries to my agent when we first sold it, and it was like announced in Publishers Marketplace, but I have no idea. Like, I'm not privy to those conversations at all.
Right. So
I think all of that just sort of happens like in the background without me, sort of. So I have no idea to answer your question, honestly.
I mean, I think about one of the great, I don't know if you watch What We Do in the Shadows. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the movie was already great, but the series is equally great. And I could see, maybe there's an organization, like the way you translate your book is there's an organization, an outreach organization to help these creatures. So you've got your human characters that are,
I had like anxiety of influence about what we do in the shadows because I was working on this at the time when the series was coming out. So I denied myself watching it, even though I really wanted to. And when the pub date happened just recently, I allowed myself to binge the whole thing. So it's very fresh on my mind right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I just love it. I just love it. It's so smart. And like, I loved the movie when it came out, but then, so I think also like a little worried that the series wouldn't sort of be what I would have hoped, but it is so its own thing.
Yeah.
I really admire what they've done with it.
Yeah, no, it's really good. But the movie was also great, and that idea of looking at documentary crew going in and documenting these 4 vampire roommates. I mean, it's but again, it's interesting how you like with your book, you just look at something familiar in a new way. You flip that script, and suddenly you've got a whole new opportunity to tell stories, and in a very fun and amusing way.
Yeah, I mean they took their the vampire crew. I think it was just in season 3 where they took them to Las Vegas, and I was like, that I took mine to Las Vegas too, so I'm glad I didn't watch it, until
right.
I like have the same jokes or anything.
Well, no, it's okay because it's the city that it's not like New York. You can go into a casino and there's no windows. So that you could stay in a casino all the time as long as you stayed you could play like a poker room that has no windows in it at all. You never know what time it is. So casinos are the safest places vampires can be.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about it, I was like, where is, so obvious like Las Vegas, but then the other place they can go is like Patagonia or like Finland. Is what I was thinking. So.
Well, then you get into 30 Days of Night territory. I don't know if you ever read the graphic novel or seen the book. It's like great. We no daylight for 30 days. We're doing great. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on. I hope I didn't keep you too long, but
It's a pleasure.
This is so much fun. So the book is on Amazon right now. Go and order it. I tell everybody you got to go order this book. And can people find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, all the places. And then I was going to mention too that there's 2 sweepstakes going on right now. One of them is with my publisher, Running Press. They have a spooky books giveaway that's going on through Instagram. It's Running Press, and if you go to the Running Press website or Instagram account, you should be able to find the spooky giveaway that they're doing, and it's like 3 books that they're giving away. One of them is this one.
Oh, cool.
And then the other one is through the Hatchet group has these spooky giveaways they're doing all month. And this week happens to be the week that my book is in the spooky bundle.
Oh, well, there you go.
So that's called Novel Suspects is the name of that website where they have like excerpts from books that are out and stuff like that. And you can click on a sweepstakes link there too. So just in case anybody is like, into giveaways and stuff. But I also wanted to congratulate you on Tango Shalom because we were watching your trailer, and I just thought it looked like so much fun, and it looked just so like I'd never seen. I mean, it's like said it was directed by the person who did my Big Fat Greek Wedding.
It's like he produced it. It's a little. Gabe Bologna, he directed it. Who's the son of Joseph Bologna, who was in like My Favorite Year and who's in the film. But yeah, it's again, it was sort of like your book. It was sort of a wacky idea, that turned into. And I think that those are sometimes the best. By the way, thank you. I appreciate your kind words about the movie. It comes out on VOD this weekend, so anybody in North America can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh my goodness, like that's a big deal. Like you're. I mean, it came out, then it came out. It looked like from what I was reading, like it was coming out more and more and more. Like more and more places were picking it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that have happened. Something even happened today. regarding the Golden Globes. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to get a Golden Globe nomination or anything, but it's a weird, like the United Nations tweeted out about the movie, about its interfaith, and you know what I've always realized is you never know when you make something and put it out into the world. A lot of the time, no one cares. But sometimes if you put stuff out in the world and people discover it, it has. I love it when it takes on a life of its own, because once you've, well, I have a philosophical question for you about, there's a lot of people who've always said to me, well, Rob, I only write for myself. But don't you think that writing like a story or like your book, doesn't writing anything presuppose that there's going to be a readership for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are kind of talking about two different things when they say that. Like, there's audience, and then there's kind of like that thing of like, if I always tell students, like, if you don't write for yourself, like, why should anyone else want to read it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're not entertaining yourself, if you don't find it fun, if you don't find it interesting, or you're just writing it for a market or kind of a cold calculated purpose, then nobody else is going to like it. It has to, people can feel it when it's genuine and it's something that you really are excited about. It just comes off the page, So that has to be there. But at the same time, you are, of course, writing for an audience, because otherwise you'd be writing in weird symbols that only you understand or something. I mean, like, why would you even need to write it in full sentences? Like, if you're not writing for an audience, then you don't really need to worry about any of how it's crafted or built or anything, as long as you're the only person who has to understand it. I mean, that doesn't make sense, So I feel like people conflate those two things, and it's really important to separate them, that there are different parts of the process.
I totally agree with you. Well, everyone, for those of you who might have come in late, the book is How to Survive a Human Attack. It's by Casey Flann, or Kathy Flann, but Casey Flann is the author. And it's just like it says. It's a delightful book about how if you, and maybe you are a creature of the night, and maybe you are a supernatural being that could benefit from this book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so much fun. And Kathy, I want to thank you for coming on to Robservations Halloween week. I can't think of a better time to have you here. And of course, I'm quite fond of I would say you're the better half of the family, Dr. Howard Yang. Dr. Yang, I haven't seen him. He hasn't been around these parts in a while, but he's an old friend, and it's great to have connected through him. So that's fantastic. And by the way, you guys sent me a copy of this book, or your publisher did. Whomever, I want to thank you for sending me the book, because it was a lot of fun to have you here. So do you have any Halloween plans?
Well, we'll be taking our son. Our son is 5. So here's a great story, actually. We told him, Halloween, you need to dress as like something really scary. That's what we do on Halloween. And you know what he picked? Santa. Santa.
That's fantastic. Is it going to be a bloody Santa that carries around like a knife?
Well, I mean, he's just going to be straight up Santa. And when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that is actually one of the few things I've ever seen him terrified of, was Santa. So it made so much weird sense. I was like, oh, that's legit. I feel that. I mean,
that is a great. I'd never thought about that, but what a great Halloween costume. Because it is the Nightmare Before Christmas, after all.
Yeah, I mean, and Howard's going to be a Christmas tree because he's tall, and then we got the dog's going to be a snowman. We've got it all worked out, so that's our plan.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for being here. I will let you go. Thank you very much for your time and for coming on this show.
Thank you, Rob. Take care. Have a good rest of your night.
And you too. Happy Halloween.
You too.
That was Kathy Flann. The book is How to Survive a Human Attack, and everybody should get it because it's great. It's a great fun book, and I thought it was a great concept, which I thought was new and unique. So great to have her here, and it was a lot of fun. I loved reading the book. let's see if any of you have. Do I have any letters? I don't know. Let's see. I do have letters, but you know what? Now that I realize this, we've been on for almost an hour and a half. I think I'm going to cut this episode. Cut it now. End the episode. Because why not? I can't follow that up. That was amazing. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you do want to write letters to the channel, you can go to the Burnettwork.net website and send letters to me, and I will read them. I know I've got a whole big backup of letters. I want to thank people for supporting the channel through tips and super chats. Thank you all very much. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Louise X. Sparrow, Darren Seeley. Who else is here? Justin Toner is here. Hello, Justin. And I don't know who else was here, but I think all you guys are here. I want to thank all the Blue Wrenches, everybody that is a moderator on the channel. This is Robservations episode number 756. I will, of course, be back tomorrow. I want to say that on Heel vs. Babyface's channel on YouTube, we are beginning a 9-episode, a 9-week look at Squid Game, an episode-by-episode look at the Netflix, the explosively popular Squid Game. We're starting with episode 1. I would suggest everybody watch it before we come in, or before you watch the show. Tomorrow we're doing that at 12 o'clock our time on his channel. Then I will be back here on my channel. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. And on that note, I would say to everybody, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And on that note, oh, by the way, I do want to promote one more thing. Star Trek Coda Book 2, The Ashes of Tomorrow by Mr. James Swallow, dropped yesterday. I'm about 100 pages in. I basically had one. I was going to read it in one sitting. I just didn't have all the time. I'll probably finish it in, I guess, 2 sittings. But it is, as I've said, crisis in infinite Star Trek universes, truly infinite Star Trek universes, and it's a shame because it brings to end the post-Dominion War Nemesis Star Trek novel timeline after 2 decades. Another thing I can hate Star Trek Discovery and Picard and Strange New Worlds for. But mostly Lower Decks and Picard because they're the ones that messed up the continuity. And on that note, on that happy note, we happy few, we band of brothers. There's a little Shakespeare for you. And on that note, I would say, as always, have a better day.